Chocolate? Chocolate! Chocolate!
Hello everybody, Chocolate Guy here, and welcome back to part 2 of my list, ranking every episode in Owl House Season 1. And we have some great ones to talk about here. I decided to do this list in 3 parts because the top 5 segments are taking longer to make than I thought, and the back end of this list has already taken way too long to be released because I got caught up making that Valentine's Day video, and other things kept me from releasing the continuation of this list sooner. So I wanted to get something out, and on top of that, the top 10 segments are longer overall than last videos anyways. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, I suggest you do so first, as I give my overall thoughts on the show and first season there, along with talking about entries 19 through 11, and it's a good setup for this video. With all that said, after some delay, let's finally jump right back into the list, getting into the top 10. Even though I really like I Was a Teenage Abomination, especially on rewatch, this was the first episode that really impressed me. We really get to explore Luce, Ida, and King's characters here through a fun story that even has some great world-building moments, like the acid rain for a smaller example, and learning about Ida's curse, along with learning more about magic, and one bigger thing I'll discuss in a second. This is also a really focused episode. There's a fun setup that perfectly shows where our characters are currently at in the show. King trying to gain respect, Ida is dealing with mysterious things, and Luce is trying to learn magic. And the episode has fun and develops all these through a story of King and Luce trying to stop a mysterious monster who they think broke into the house. This episode only focuses on this one story while developing different characters, and it's great. The show can do subplots well, but this episode does such a good job just focusing on the single story and having everything that happens add to that plot, which makes it really engaging. There's some fun twists and turns involving Ida being the monster and how they have to deal with that, and the episode is paced really well because of how focused it is. There's also some great atmosphere, and it's some of the best of the season. But the best thing in this episode, and something I have to mention, the glyph reveal is so cool. How Luce figures out she can do magic through a more unconventional way, being an unconventional creature in this world who isn't from here, the way she also makes magic kind of through creative expression and understanding the basic makeup of the spell, it's all just so amazing. And leads to a really cool, rewarding, and beautiful scene that makes you want to see more of Luce's journey, and learn more about how she's gonna do magic going forward. The way it's presented is just so striking in the best way, and the fact that they made a light spell feel this cool and important seems impossible, but they do because Luce thought she could never make magic and is just so proud that she made this simple spell, and you feel that through this scene because of how big of an accomplishment it is for her. It's a great character development moment for her and a great world building moment as well. It's a true highlight of the episode. But with all these good things, the episode can feel a little standard in its actual story on a surface level, as a lot of it is just King and Luce slowly going around the house, trying to figure out what to do about this mysterious beast, and it can also be a little slow at points, even if it is engaging. Also, some of the character building, even if still good, is once again a little spelled out, which isn't the biggest problem here, but is in stark contrast with the more subtle, well-written moments you also get in this episode. So while I really like this one, there's just some episodes later in the season with a little more polish, including So I do think this episode is a little bit better than Intruder. because the world building gets much more of a focus and is better in this episode for that reason. But there's also better character development here as well. Both elements are great. We get to learn about the Coven system and how this world operates, along with learning more about different kinds of magic through our main characters attending this convention event. On the character end, we get to learn more about Ida and why she operates the way she does, and get to see her relationship with her sister Lilith, who is a great character and rival/antagonist to Ida. Even if this relationship isn't the most fleshed out yet, they still have a really cool dynamic because of how different they are from each other that is not only explored an amount here, but sets the building blocks for some interesting stuff later on. At the same time, we get some development on Amity and her relationship with Luce, and it's really interesting seeing how different they are, but are trying to accomplish the same thing even if they have different challenges to get there. And it's so cool and a lot of fun to see them clash, because they both don't understand what the other is going through or their worldview. This episode really fleshes out Amity and why she acts the way she does, especially towards Luce, and it kind of makes you feel for her at the end when she realizes she was tricked into cheating, because you see how hard she has worked, and her slight change in perspective about Luce and her right to practice magic is really cool to see. The plot of this episode is just really fun, especially when it gets going. The episode also has a cool setting that they do a lot with to develop the world and show these conflicts off. The conflicts are nicely set up, and the two fights are cool for different reasons, but the character development around them make them all the more interesting. The twists that not only Ida was cheating, but Lilith as well, in Luce and Amity's duel, makes the entire conflict have another interesting edge, as you don't know how it's gonna play out, and it makes it really awkward and funny at the same time. And Lilith and Ida's fight is really action-packed. I have to mention that the ending is so good. How Luce makes Amity somewhat understand what she is going through by showing her a glyph. It's such a sweet and powerful moment that feels so genuine. And it's so cool to see her actually move Amity, and for her to take something away from this. One of the best scenes of the season, and I mean it. But what keeps this one from being one of my favorites, even though it's many others, is the setup can be kinda slow, as the first half is just walking around the convention. And while there's good elements, the Coven system is underdeveloped here. I know it's the first appearance of it, but I think we should have learned a bit more about how they operate and Ida's distaste for them. So this episode is really close to being great, but for me, its issues keep it from being any higher. This was one I wasn't super crazy about my first time watching, but watching it again, it grew on me a lot. So much so that it landed at the top of the list of episodes I consider to be really good, but not great. What holds this one back from being a great Season 1 episode is the liar reveal stuff with Luce and the detention kids where they think she was lying to them is dumb and feels like it was a forced added thing because they had no other idea how to move the story along. Also, this episode can be a little slow in places, and the pacing is weird too, as certain things in the story, even if they have some setup, feel like they just kind of happen to take the story in a slightly new direction. But the reason I really like this episode is that for the most part, I really do like this story. We not only get so many great Luce moments throughout, and there's a fun climax involving something that was hinted at earlier, despite my issues with how it's revealed. But this climax is also used to show the benefits of using multiple forms of magic and more creative expression, which is one of the main points of the episode. In relation to that, I love how relatable Luce's struggle is, while also being extremely personal. Going to a new school in the world is a big deal for Luce, because she wants to make a good first impression, but also wants to get the most out of what's offered there as possible, because studying magic is something she wasn't able to do back home, so she's just interested in trying all forms of magic, but also wants to study all forms of magic because she doesn't know which one she is the most interested in, so she just wants to study them all. And this is super relatable. Being in school, or really many aspects of life, it can feel like you're being boxed in to one or two things you may or may not be interested in. When you have so many interests, or don't know what you want to study, or want to study many things. This is something I can relate to as someone who has a lot of random interests, and wants to explore many of them through school and outside of it, even if I can't always do that. This story is just so interesting for how it explores Luce's struggle with this, and the ending where she proves Principal Bump wrong, and that this is a good thing, and her and the other kids get to study multiple forms of magic because of that, especially her getting that outfit. It's all just so cool. But I think the best part of this story is actually the interesting parallels between Luce and Ida, and how they don't make this super apparent until the end, so you can kind of piece it together throughout the story. And seeing the episode through that lens is so interesting because of how much they have differed in the past, and how different they still are in many ways, and what we have learned about Ida's past previously, to see their interest and love of all kinds of magic be more similar than you would expect is such a cool revelation. There are still better episodes this season for the problems this one has, but it's such a strong one and was super close to being great. So what episodes are great, you may be asking? Well, so this might be a hotter take on the list, because I know some people really like this episode, but a lot of people will completely disagree with me, putting it above the last couple. But not only do I think it's better than those episodes, but it's the first great episode on the list. The reason is, while it's a less serious episode than others, it's so much fun and so funny. This is probably the most fun I had watching an episode all season. There's nothing amazing here because it doesn't try to do any super big things, but what it does try to do is tell a fun story while messing around with cliches of sports movies, and even taking some shots at Harry Potter, making fun of fantasy sports tropes. It's so enjoyable because it succeeds at this amazingly well. This episode kind of feels like a standard episode of the show up until this point that isn't super focused on an overarching story, but it's done in the best way possible. They have perfected the format these episodes are told in. Luce coming up with a scheme to get Basha to stop bullying her friends by challenging her to a Grudgby match is a story that is formatted in a similar way to many other episodes this season, where Luce either comes up with a plan or challenges whatever problem she has to something so she can stop it. But it works so well here, even in comparison to others that use this format well, because the setup is really good and they do so much with this idea. It is decently relatable how in high school, sometimes it feels like kids who are big shots on the most popular sports team at a school can get away with pretty much anything. And Luce, Gus, and Willow are just treated so badly that you want to see Luce's plan succeed. And even if it's not the most well thought out, her logic behind it does make sense. So the conflict is fun, especially because the rest of the episode just has so many jokes and funny moments, like the training montage and great character moments like Amity's gay panic at multiple points in the episode, which is just so funny to watch. Amity's backstory is also cool to give the story another interesting edge, and it's really cool and admirable just how much Luce cares for her friends, which makes you so engaged in such a simple and goofy story at points. The actual Grudgby match itself is super fun, with some cool twists at the end to wrap up the episode in a cool way, especially that shot at Harry Potter. The subplot is also pretty fun, and has some legitimately great setup to the next 2 episodes. So yeah, this is just a simple but really fun one that goes all in on what it tries to do, and is a true standout from Season 1. Especially because of how fun the characters are to watch here, and the ending is really sweet. But the reason it's not any higher is because even with all these positives, every part of the episode isn't the most interesting, as the story is still simple, and there are some slower, less fun moments for this reason. And there are other episodes that try to do bigger things to much better results. But this episode is still such a blast, and a really nice note/love letter for what the show has been up until this point in the season before the much darker last 2 episodes. On first watch, this episode was one of my absolute favorites, landing in the top 3. And while it has shrunk on me a little bit since then, I can't deny how great of an episode this was early in the season, and was the episode of the show that got me hooked. This is the first episode that really dives into and explores some of our main characters. We learn so much about Amity here, through her interactions with Luce, but especially through her siblings, while also getting some great development on Luce here as well. The plot is a lot of fun for this reason, as it's cool to see Luce want to be friends with Amity and get close to her siblings, and through them she learns a lot about Amity from how they talk about her, and the twist of their plan with her diary. This is just a really interesting way to develop a character through Luce's interactions with that character's siblings, and the writing in this episode is so good. And through this, Luce realizes she might actually connect with Amity more than she thinks, and share some similarities and similar interests in some things with her, along with this plot being really unique and a lot of fun because of the interesting way it develops its characters, and it also has some great twists and turns, making the story more interesting. Like the twist about the siblings' plans for Amity's diary, as I said, and the great interaction Luce has with Amity after this plan is revealed, and Amity thinks Luce was more involved than she was. I love the scene where Amity calls Luce a bully. I think what she has to say is really striking, and the misunderstanding and relationship between them is just so interesting here, and it really makes the change at the end of the episode for Amity all the more interesting. The ending climax, where Luce and Amity have to work together and actually kind of enjoy each other's company, and once again, we get to see some of their similarities that they share throughout, is another great part of the episode. The episode is also just paced really well. We get into the story really quickly while having an interesting setup. The scene between Amity and Luce at the beginning shows that there may be more to Amity, and the episode does a good job showing you that Luce really does want to befriend her, but reestablishes their rocky relationship, with Amity still having negative feelings towards Luce. This makes you want to learn more about her and want to see Luce succeed in her goal, and throughout the rest of the episode, not only do you learn more about her, but you also get to see just how different she is from her siblings firsthand, which makes the episode all the more interesting. Emra and Edric are great characters, and besides their interesting role in the story, it's fun to see them mess around with Luce. The library setting is cool, and the episode has a lot of fun with its gimmick, being able to bring things in books to life, which leads to some funny gags and a cool ending conflict with a character that Amity has an attachment to being turned evil, And once again, it balances all this cool stuff while really developing Amity and making her the most interesting character of the show by making her really dynamic and by showing why she acts the way she does and even thinks the way she does through different things attached to her and her conversations with Luce, especially that ending conversation that perfectly wraps up the story by showing that Amity's perspective has changed, but we're still not quite sure by how much yet. It's a great ending to a really thought-provoking episode that develops Amity's and Luz's relationship, which leads to some other very interesting episodes and Lumity in the future. With all the great things I have to say about this episode, what keeps it out of the top 5 is that the pacing can be kind of weird in places, and we don't get a ton of interesting character development stuff until later in the episode, as we spend an amount of time playing around with gimmicks, which as I said is fun, but not the most interesting to watch on rewatch. And even if I like the siblings here, them just leaving the story makes them feel a little more like plot devices, even if I get why the episode was written like that. Also, the subplot is perfectly fine and does connect to the main story, along with not eating up too much time, but there are just other episodes higher on this list that are stronger overall packages. This one will still always have a special attachment to me though. Thank you guys so much for watching part 2 of my list. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe for more content similar to this in the future, and to stay notified for when the final part comes out. Also, leave a comment down below on what you thought of my list so far, and what your own list would have been, along with how you think the top 5 will be ordered. The final part will be 110% released between March 6th and March 12th, because that's when my spring break is, so stay tuned for that. After that though, I'll be releasing more Hey Arnold Season 1 episode reviews, and maybe even another classic Nicktoons video of some kind. But with all that said, this is Chocolate Guy, signing off.